Hi, and welcome along to the North Lodge Cottage Garden, where it is now May, one of my favourite months in the garden. It is unseasonably warm and unseasonably dry, and I wanted to bring you this video to touch base with a very basic gardening technique which I fear many of you are getting very wrong. My inbox is literally quite filled every single day with dozens of people asking the same questions about black spot, about disease, and about pest attack. And the answer to many of this is normally down to watering and the alleviation of stress. Now, much like a human being, if you are under stress, you are much more likely to become ill with a cold or flu, God forbid COVID, or any of those one things. But the same is to be had with all garden plants, and especially roses. And more importantly, if you have bought bare root roses over the last 12 to 18 months and they're new in the ground. So I thought I'd touch base with you and just go through a few basic gardening techniques to make sure that your watering is on point and you are alleviating as much stress as possible, especially if you're growing climbers against a wall or if you're growing roses in pots. Now, very basically, if you have a rose in the garden, it is going to need something in the region of around one of these a week. This is a 2.5 gallon galvanized watering can. Comes in many shapes and sizes. 2.5 gallons is approximately 11 litres. It's going to need one of these at least once a week. Now, the thing to bear in mind with watering, especially if you're in a pot, most of that is going to drain straight away and go through the bottom of the pot. If you're growing a rose against a wall or a fence, there's only very good weather conditions that will ever get the rain the plant needs. For instance, if the plant is planted on a west facing aspect, if the rain is coming on from the east, you're not going to get any direct rain to the ground. So it may have rained where you are, but it might not have actually benefited the plant you need to look after. So if you've bought bare root roses, especially over the last 12 to 18 months, and they're fresh in the ground, you really must pay very close attention to your watering. And I thought what I'd do, I think many of you are utterly shocked by how much water we're talking about. Doing this with the hose at about 6 o'clock in the evening is not going to cut it. In fact, I'm here to tell you that doing that is actually making it much worse. The water you need to give to your plant needs to go right down deep into the soil. And if we're talking about roses and newly planted shrubs, those roots have got to be plunged deep down into the soil, away from the heat and up down into the subsoil where the moisture is actually contained. Doing this, unfortunately, all it is doing is dampening, and you'll be quite shocked, only the first couple of millimeters of soil. 70% of this is actually instantly lost and evaporated back off, especially if you're watering in the height of the day. Now, with roses, to alleviate black spot and mildew on roses, doing this, I'm going to go on about this, doing this especially late in the evening is really bad. Now, I know most of the time a gardener will tell you to water your garden just as the sun goes down and those daytime temperatures starting to drop off, and that is certainly the right thing to do. But doing this, we're going to do it again, doing this to your roses in the very early part of the evening is really bad. And the reason why I'm going to say that is because what happens is you're going to make the air between the soil and the plant damp and cold, and it's going to sit there overnight, meaning that your plant is then susceptible to things like mildew. So if you are doing this, again, if you are doing that with your roses, you must make sure you do that in the morning just before the sun comes up, and then that cold moisture air is not actually trapped between the soil and the rose itself, and you should be having much better air circulation, and you should alleviate mildew. Now, black spot is much more complicated, and it's normally down to stress. It basically involves tiny little black spots which then yellow all over the leaves, and tragically a lot of the time the plant can completely shed all of the leaves, and you need to collect those up and take those away and really give your plant some love. In really bad circumstances, if you've got a really bad case of black spot, some summer pruning may be required, but it can normally be alleviated by watering your plants properly at the base and not doing this all over the foliage, which in turn also spoils the flowers. So going back to the technique, you're going to need at least 2.5 gallons, which is around 11 litres of water per plant per week. And I'm going to put the hose now into the watering can, and you're going to time it just for you to get a gist that how bad doing this and how long you'd actually have to stand out in the garden doing this for to make any difference that a rose plant will be. So I'm going to put this on, and we're going to put that, and we're going to continue to talk while we do that. I like, if I can, to get this from the water butt, and even if my water butts run dry, what I do is I put the hose in very, very severe circumstances when water dries up, put the hose into the top of the water butt and use it as a bund. It's a storage vessel for water, and I can go quickly either plunge my watering can, or I can put my watering can under the tap underneath, and I can do one plant and come back to it. So we're talking about 2.5 gallons, 11 litres of water. This watering can is still filling up. Just for you to get a gist that you stood there with your hose sprinkling water all over the soil really isn't cutting how much water your rose plant needs per week. Still filling up. We've got normal water pressure here at North Lodge. We're around halfway there. I'm not sure how long this has taken. I should have set a timer, but you can see from this there is an awful lot of water, and if you're simply stood and spraying water onto the surface of the soil every day, it's really not doing it. One of these once a week around the base of the plant and not on the foliage is going to seep right down into the soil and really, really water that plant well and encourage it to sink its roots right down into the soil, making it more drought tolerant in the future. There we go, we're full. That was 2.5 gallons, 11 litres, and each one of your roses, whether it's in a pot or whether it's in the ground, needs one of these at least once a week. Now, if you're growing in a pot, I would actually think it's going to need several of these, especially as the plant develops and gets much, much larger, which is why it is really important that you do two things. One, you make sure that you're mulching your roses properly with a really good organic compost or bark, anything to literally give the soil something underneath to keep the main heat of the day off. I also mulch my pots with organic compost, as you're aware. You've seen me do that over the last couple of weeks. And if you're going to add a decorative dressing to the top of pots, which you're growing roses in, my advice really is I'm going to reach to the left here and go for something small. This is horticultural grit, something that you would normally mix with compost to make it free draining, but I do dress the tops of my pots off. And again, this does just keep the main part of the heat off of the soil. Don't be tempted to use a very large particle sized gravel or decorative mulch, something like a Scottish cobble or anything the sort of size of your fist or half the size of your fist. Something like that is going to act like a hot stone, and during the heat of the day, especially if you're in a warmer part of the world or in Europe, those are going to warm up and basically continue to cook the roots of the plant during the evening, which is really bad. Again, you probably chuckled to yourself on a warm day, you've gone out with the hose and sprayed those stones and they will steam. Well, they're holding heat all the way into the evening and continuing that drying process. So if you are dressing the tops of pots especially off with gravels, make sure the particle size is small, and if you can, keep the gravel a sort of a neutral colour, a cream or a white, something that's actually going to sort of rebuff the heat rather than absorb the heat. Something like a dark grey or black stone is obviously going to absorb heat. We come back to the other thing of the right plant in the right place as well, and that goes to planting roses in pots. If you're growing the wrong sized plant in the wrong sized pot, you are never going to be able to keep it watered. Any of the roses that reach between 3 and 4 feet are going to be suitable for growing in a pot. Anything larger than that, up into the 5 feet, and you're looking at something substantial, almost 4 feet across for the pot itself, which is too big for most people. So you are making sure that you're putting the right size plant in the right size pot, and most of the potted roses, for instance, listing a few, Harlow Carr, Estacia Vi, Olivia Rose Austin, they're going to be happy in a pot something in the region of about 50 centimeters in diameter and 60 to 70 centimeters deep, containing something in excess of around 120 to 150 litres of compost. So it's really, really quite substantial. Several questions came in from people last year saying, okay, I've got, for instance, Princess Anne, a really good firm favourite of mine from David Austin. I've got that in a pot and it's really struggling with black spot. How could I solve that problem? And again, the answer is down to watering, putting a decent sized tray underneath the pot to act as a reservoir during the hot periods of the year are really, really very important, especially if you have the tendency and you've been a little bit on the lazy side and you haven't given it the 2.5 gallons happens, it needs, and that water has simply disappeared out the bottom of the pot, the saucer there will catch a certain amount of water, and capillary action will mean that will soak back up into the soil for maybe overnight. But it also means that if the plant has a tendency to dry out without that saucer, there's a small reservoir of water there which will hopefully make it go longer periods of time without you having to water it. So I hope you found that particularly useful. Please do stop doing this all over your roses. If you can, water by hand, or worst case scenario, sometimes what I also do is I put this on lock, and I'll put this at the base of a plant and I'll leave it there for 2 or 3 minutes just to give it a really good soak. You are much better watering very well once a week than you are watering every day, because you'll basically weaken the plant itself. So now let's move one pass. There we go. The other thing to bear in mind as well, if you're also growing roses against the house, especially south or west facing walls, you really do need to pay close attention to your watering. Stress from lack of water is going to cause black spot, and it will cause wilting, and it will cause powdery mildews. The plant is going to get weak and susceptible to these things. So do make sure that you're watering the whole area very well, and wherever possible. Now I know I'm in a very blessed situation here, but I've invested an awful lot of time and an awful lot of money into the garden here at North Lodge, and I've actually installed a Rainbird automated watering system that's delivering water literally at subsoil level directly into the soil. That runs for several hours overnight whenever it's needed. And during these hugely long dry periods, I know this is silly, we're talking to you about this at the very beginning of May, but they're already saying that there is drought forecast across all of the UK and through most parts of the Channel Islands and Europe through this summer. They're saying that we're not really forecast much rain at all, and it hasn't really rained here for about a month already, so things are very dry. If you can invest in one of those sorts of systems, very simple. It's a weep hose with a nodule that dispenses water around every 12 inches, a very specific amount of water being delivered onto the soil. To the untrained eye, looks like not a lot, but over a large period of space, all watering at the same time, you have a wonderful effect of getting that water right down into the actual soil itself where it's needed, and not evaporating back off in the heat of the day. Any questions, any queries to alleviate the problems of black spot or mildew, please do keep them coming. But for now, do focus on your watering, especially if you have recently planted bare root roses. They're going to need all of the help. And bear in mind, if they're new plants, they sometimes can take 12 to 36 months to really find their feet and perform really well, providing you with the bloom size that they're published at producing, and sometimes even the fragrance can take a while to develop. Any questions, please don't hesitate to ask.